This is CyberLip on the Neo Geo, and it's one of 3 old-school run-and-gun shoot-'em-ups we're going to explore in this episode of Does It Hold Up? This is the show where I shine a light on old-school games, put them in proper context, and then decide if you should dust them off or leave them in the past. We're going to explore what critics said at the time, and then go over what made each game special. So grab your favorite headband and get ready to kick some alien butt, because we're about to find out if run-and-gun shoot-'em-ups hold up in 2017. Our first game is Midnight Resistance on the Sega Genesis, which is a port of a moderately successful 1989 arcade game from Data East. I remember stuffing a lot of quarters into this cabinet for 2 reasons. 1, it reminded me of Contra, and 2, it had an 8-way rotary joystick. The gameplay actually helped to separate it from a lot of the other run-and-gun shoot-'em-ups of that era, reminding me more of games like Ikari Warriors and Guerrilla War. As a home game, Data East had to make some serious changes to the gameplay. Instead of being able to rotate the joystick in 360 degrees, we used the D-pad to aim in 8 directions. The compromise is that you can hold down the B button to lock in the direction, so you can run forwards while shooting backwards. This isn't a perfect solution, but it works well and is now standard in most run-and-gun shooters. Here are a few other things you should know about Midnight Resistance on the Genesis. It's about saving your family. Although we don't learn the gruesome details until about halfway through, we eventually discover that our hero's family, including wife, kids, and parents, have been abducted by aliens. Oddly enough, the only one he seems worried about is his dad. It's short. I beat the entire game in less than 20 minutes, and that includes replaying a couple of stages after continuing. It's single player only. Unlike the arcade games and most 2D shoot-'em-ups of that era, this console port lacked a 2-player mode. That hurts. There's a level skip. If you hold down the C button while starting the game, you'll be able to skip the levels at pretty much any time. Just pause the game and press the A button. But what's the point when the game only lasts 20 minutes? It has a Sophie's Choice ending. If you don't collect enough keys before the final showdown, you'll only be able to save 1 or 2 family members. I guess this means the rest will rot in those glass cages. Critics were largely into this Genesis port back in 1991. The game scored mostly 8s from magazines like Mean Machine Sega, Mega Play, CVG, and Megatech, with Electronic Gaming Monthly calling it exactly the game the Genesis needs. Die Hard Game Fan called the game a classic, and then went on to run the same review under 2 different names. Weird. So the question is, does Midnight Resistance hold up? In a world where you can play the original arcade game with customizable controls, this Genesis port is hard to recommend. Data East did the best they could with the limited hardware, but it's just not in the same league as Gunstar Heroes and Contra. The fact that it only takes 20 minutes to beat is also an issue. I know that most run-and-gun arcade ports are pretty short, but this one's a little too easy and lacking depth. Maybe you'll want to go back and save the entire family, but the fight isn't interesting enough. I say no, Midnight Resistance does not hold up. Let's start our next game with a confession. As a kid growing up in the 1980s, I was never a big fan of G.I. Joe. I know I'm probably in the minority here, but I was always more into science fiction than war. So I found myself preferring the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Transformers, and Ghostbusters. As a result, I missed out on G.I. Joe, a real American hero for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That turns out to have been a big mistake. Released early in 1991, this is the only game in this episode that was created specifically for a console. This let Taxon toy with the formula in some interesting ways, especially when it came to creating a crew. You were able to choose 3 different characters and then swap between them at any time. This reminds me a lot of the 1989 Mutant Turtles game. Only this game is actually fun. Here are a few more things you should know about G.I. Joe on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's long. I mean, it's not like a 40-hour role-playing game or anything, but as run-and-gun shooters go, it has a lot of content. It has 6 main stages with 3 levels each. That took me about an hour to complete, which is about 3 times longer than Midnight Resistance and CyberLip. It has vehicles. Much like what we would eventually see in Metal Slug, G.I. Joe lets you pilot a bunch of different vehicles. Unfortunately, they're kinda useless and get stuck pretty easily. You're better off on foot. It's varied. While most run-and-gun games are nothing more than running and, well, gunning, G.I. Joe would mix up the action by adding maze levels where the player plans a series of explosives. These sections were large and purposely difficult to traverse, adding an extra layer of challenge to the game. It was one of Taxon's last games. Released in January of 1991, G.I. Joe was the second to last game released by Taxon. They followed this up 1 month later with Magician, which ended up being the final product before going out of business. For what it's worth, the G.I. Joe sequel, the Atlantis Factor, was picked up by Capcom. Critics weren't as enthusiastic about G.I. Joe as I would have expected. Nintendo Power gave it a 3.8 out of 5. It got a 7 from Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and GamePro scored it a 4 out of 5. Electronic Gaming Monthly liked the backgrounds and parallax scrolling, but felt the weapons could have been more intense. They gave it 7s and 8s. After speeding through CyberLip and Midnight Resistance, I was a little surprised at how much I liked G.I. Joe. It's not quite as good as Contra, but it has a lot going for it. I really enjoyed choosing between Duke, Snake Eyes, Captain Gridiron, Rock and Roll, Blizzard, and General Hawk, and it was neat seeing the different personalities come out. Even as someone who doesn't have a lot of nostalgia for the toy line or cartoon series, I would say G.I. Joe, a real American hero, holds up. Of the 3 games we're looking at today, CyberLip is the only one I had a strong opinion about going in. Despite being into the run-and-gun genre, I could never get into this Neo Geo game as a kid. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to revisit this 27-year-old shooter in this feature, because there's nothing I would like more than to change my mind on this early 24-bit action game. I think one of the reasons why I was so disappointed by CyberLip is because it's a lot slower than the other run-and-gun shooters of the era. This was long before Metal Slug, so I wasn't yet used to SNK's more leisurely approach to the genre. It also seemed shallow, offering a bunch of lame weapons and not adding much to the formula. What it did have was good graphics, though I'm not entirely sure they've aged well in the last 3 decades. Here are a few more things you should know about CyberLip on the Neo Geo. There's no diagonal shooting. In a lot of ways, CyberLip feels a lot closer to Metal Slug than Contra, especially when it comes to the gameplay. I don't think I'll ever understand why SNK refuses to embrace the whole 8-way aiming thing. It's basically the Terminator. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Humans create a sentient supercomputer that creates a bunch of robots that take over the world. The big difference is that this game literally features a giant talking mouth instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's talkative. Like many early Neo Geo games, CyberLip features a lot of unnecessary chatter. You'll hear memorable lines like, "You're doomed" and "I'm a goner" endlessly, which actually makes the experience a lot worse. It never got ported to consoles. I mean, it obviously hit the Neo Geo home console as both a cartridge and CD, but it never found its way to the Super NES or Genesis. It even missed SNK's arcade compilations. I guess they had too many Metal Slug games to re-release. It has a twist ending. After you've fought through the city, sewers, bombed out Wasteland, and defeated the final boss, you'll discover that the man telling you what to do is actually an evil robot that has been using our action hero to take over the world. You're left with him happy, and the remaining humans forced to live under an evil robot overlord. I hate it when that happens. Critics weren't too kind to CyberLip at the time, though most of that has to do with the expense of cartridges. Both GamePro and Die Hard Game Fan rated the shooter a lot lower than most Neo Geo launch games, complaining that it wasn't worth the money. Game Fan's Tom Slick said the game was too short, but he liked it anyway. He hoped that more character games come out for the Neo Geo. You know, because there were so many 24-bit games without characters? While I agree with most of the criticisms, I actually found myself liking CyberLip more now than I did back when it first came out. I think a lot of this has to do with Metal Slug, which has gotten me used to the more leisurely pace. What I don't like is how the game forgets to create new backgrounds for the second half, instead having us see the same boring sewers until you can't take it anymore. This game is short and easy, but not without a few fun moments. And that ending is pretty great. But does it hold up? Well, I'd say no, but I'm definitely on the fence. After playing these 3 games in a row, I'm ready to say that old school run and gun shooters still hold up, for the most part. The action is still fun, but some of the games I played this week felt dated in a bad way. The standout of the bunch was G.I. Joe, a real American hero, which did a lot to evolve the formula by cycling through multiple characters and adding different types of missions. If you're gonna play one of these, then I suggest Yo Joe. I mean, go G.I. Joe. So here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite old school run and gun shoot 'em up? And what are your thoughts of these 3 games we talked about today? I want to know, so voice your opinions in the comments section below. Do it! Hey, I hope you enjoyed the new series. I've been looking for ways to get back into playing some older games, so I'm hoping that this will be an elegant way to cover a lot of ground. My plan is to look at a different genre every time, always covering the games that didn't get a lot of attention. Ideally, we'll spend time talking about games that time forgot, and not the classics everybody else knows, because let's be honest here, everybody's already covered those games. Let me know what you think, and make sure and click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.